Hey guys, Jeremy here with KISS Aquatic Systems. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. This is the 2-year anniversary update video of my ultra low tech Nano Reef tank. So this 20-gallon tank, it's got the 3 key essentials: light, flow, and heat, and it's got nothing else. So you can see here my fancy schmancy super high-end lighting system. And of course I've also got a power head and a heater. So yeah, wire management is clearly a very big challenge here. Anyways, this is a mixed reef, mostly LPS corals along the bottom half of the tank, and macroalgae along the top half. Now this tank has had some challenges along the way, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But at this point, things are running smoothly, and I am getting much better growth out of these corals here. So let's zoom in and get a closer look at some of these corals, really all of these corals, going right to left. So we've got 15 different corals in this tank. 13 of them are LPS. I don't know why, but LPS corals have always been my favorites. I just find them to be a lot more fun to watch. So you've got the sweeper tentacles, the shorter tentacles, the super inflatability and puffiness, and just the overall aggressive and predatory behavior that these corals tend to display, which does sort of set them apart from a lot of the SBS and soft corals. But on the flip side, the fleshy LPS corals that you see here, they do sort of tend to be smaller and slower growers than softies and SPS. At least when you're talking about the $10 frags that I'm willing to buy. But this is a small 20-gallon tank, so I can get away with that here and not feel as much pressure to add a ton of fast-growing corals to fill up the space. For a bigger tank, I'd probably stock differently, but under the circumstances here, I think this works. Now, some of these corals are quite mean. 6 of them in particular do throw out some very long sweeper tentacles, mostly at night. So as time passes, and assuming they continue to grow, I'm going to have to start moving them around a bit, further away from each other, probably a little further up higher in the rockwork, which I've already started to do actually. And of course, my 3 Cephastrias on the left side have been doing their job and really spreading and encrusting the rockwork there. So over time, this tank should continue to slowly fill up, just with these existing corals I have now. So I haven't added any new corals in 6 months, and not really planning on getting any more at this point. So we'll just see how these guys continue to do. Alright, so let's zoom back out now. I think I've given you guys enough close-ups of all my aptasia and hair algae for the moment. So it's actually kind of funny. My biggest challenge with this tank here hasn't had anything to do with my lack of equipment or tech, but rather with my decision to really allow tons of macroalgae to just dominate the top half of this very brightly lit tank, which I really did from the very beginning. So what happened is I ended up creating a situation here where the macros really stripped my water of pretty much all nutrients, to the extent that my corals really weren't getting enough from the water column. So I did manage to starve out the few SPS corals I had here. And my softies, they're still alive, but they're not thrilled. They're just kind of staying the same size as they have been all along. So my LPS corals were actually doing reasonably okay for the first year, which is good because they've always been the dominant corals here. But I think that's probably because a lot of them have really big mouths and those nasty sweeper tentacles. So they were actually able to hunt at night for food, given that I do have a massive pod and tiny little worm and snail population here for them. So to some extent, having a super clean water, um, super clean, low nutrient, low dissolved organic water can be a good thing for stony corals in particular, because it makes the calcification process easier. But on the other hand, corals are animals and they do need to eat, especially these LPS guys. So, about 6 or 7 months ago, I changed up how I fed this tank. Previously, I was dosing spirulina powder to the tank once a week, really just broadcast feeding. But I kind of felt like most of the nutrients just seemed to go to algae rather than the corals. So I just stopped doing that entirely and instead started spot feeding all of the individual corals with raw shrimp once per week instead. So still very light in terms of the total amount of nutrient inputs in this tank, but just really much better targeted, directly feeding direct polyps with almost nothing getting lost and going anywhere else. Unsurprisingly, I still get good macro growth in this tank, which for me actually is important because I do really like my macros. But the corals are definitely responding well. And the past 6 months, I've really had a step function increase in the growth rate for really all of them. So in that time, I've managed to slowly start shifting the balance of power in this tank between the corals and the macros. From maybe 6 months ago, I was at 10% corals, 90% macros. And today, I'd say I'm probably about 30% corals, 70% macros. So my target here over the next 6 months is to get to about 50-50 market share between the corals and macros, and I think I'll get there. Another side benefit from changing up my feeding approach has been that my Aptasia population has started to go down over the past 6 months without me really having to mess with it much. I mean, this tank's still not great Aptasia wise, I have more than I like, but it's definitely better than it was in the past, even with a really hands off approach. So, I mean, I guess it sort of makes sense that Aptasia declines when I stopped broadcast feeding the tank, but definitely happy about that. So, yeah, folks, that's the update. This tank, it's running smoothly at this point, has been for a while. The corals are all happy, and most importantly, there's really very little work involved here, which is good because I'm lazy and I have way too many tanks. So basically, one day a week, I go around with the tweezers and hand feed my 13 LPS corals. Not every polyp, obviously, but each coral does get enough shrimp to keep it happy. Usually takes about an hour based on how much I feed for the coral to totally engulf and consume the shrimp that I give it. Also, once a week, usually the same evening, so I'll do the feeding in the morning, I'll do my 10% weekly water change, which is where I also like to prune back a little bit of the macros. I do have to dose daily. Every morning, I add a few milliliters of a balanced 1 part calcium and alkalinity supplement. Right now, I'm using the Tropic Marin Carbocalcium. And I mean, I'm reasonably happy with it. It's enough to keep my alk reasonably stable, call it the mid 7s to low 8 DKH. This tank used to run a bit higher in the low 9s, but that was before the corals really started growing a lot faster. But I'm okay with it in the 7s to 8s. That's definitely within normal seawater parameters, as long as it's stable, which it is. So all in all, this tank, it's low tech, but it's also pretty low maintenance. Once a week feeding, once a week water change, and tiny little bit of dosing once every morning. I actually don't have to do top offs either because I cover this tank pretty tightly with the lid, so no real evaporation to worry about. So yeah, thanks guys. That's all for now. This tank, it's been a fun little side project for me the past 2 years. And honestly, I'm enjoying it way more than I thought I would. So for all you reefers out there who are cheap and lazy like me, maybe there's some hope for us after all. So thanks again, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, and happy reefing.